It's smack in the middle of Colombia, the town of Mesetas. That's the venue for a ceremony marking the end of disarmament for Latin America's oldest guerrilla movement, Marxist FARC militants laying down the last of their guns, they say, and officials transforming into a political movement, one that'll be represented in parliament. But it'll take much more to make the peace last. For one, the FARC still has arms caches. There are still other armed groups in the jungle. The leftist ELN, which the government says finds itself in the path as well of right-wing paramilitaries, who all have an eye to the drug trade. Will those who've disarmed be sitting ducks? Can the authorities offer a sustainable alternative to narcotics as a way of living for the mostly indigenous populations who still face the same issues of poverty that incited some to take up arms way back in 1964. Also, how to foster trust and reconciliation with the staunchly conservative opposition in Colombia. And what role will regional powers, most notably the United States, play in cementing this peace? Today in the France 24 debate, we're wondering if it really is a farewell to arms we're witnessing in Colombia. With us, Inti Landaro, former Bogota bureau chief for the Wall Street Journal. Welcome back.
Good evening.
From the Colombian capital, Álvaro Ferrero Tascón, columnist and political analyst for newspaper El Spectador. Thank you for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Thanks as well to Paloma Valencia, senator for the Centro Democrático Party of former President Álvaro Uribe. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Very glad to be here.
And from Washington, Benjamin Kreutzfeld, who's at the Johns Hopkins School for Advanced International Studies. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
The France 24 debate on Facebook and Twitter, the hashtag F24debate. It's not the end of the peace process, but after years of those stop and start secret talks that then became open, there was that false start, the first peace deal rejected last year in a referendum. Many are hoping aloud that this time it really is the end of a conflict that's left more than 250,000 dead, 7 million displaced over decades. Yuka Royer has more.
Labelled with a serial number, this gun is now under the UN's control. The international mission in Colombia says more than 7,000 weapons have been registered and stored in these containers. The third and final phase of the arms handover by FARC rebels is a major milestone in the peace process.
The disarmament is perhaps the most important date for the last 3 generations of Colombians.
After years of negotiations, the government and the rebels agreed to end half a century of bloodshed, which left more than 220,000 people dead. A landmark peace agreement was signed last September. Under the controversial deal, the FARC would lay down their weapons, face justice, and become a political force. President Juan Manuel Santos won a Nobel Peace Prize for his peacemaking efforts. In an interview with France 24 last week, he shared his excitement over the last stage of the weapons handover, which began on the 20th of June.
And this will mean that disarmament has been completed and that the FARC will no longer exist as an armed group, and this is therefore a historic moment for Colombia.
The implementation of the deal hasn't all gone smoothly. The deadline for laying down the arms was delayed. Suspicion remains among the population. The guerrillas have given up individual weapons, but they still have hundreds of arms caches dotted around the country. The UN is supposed to find and destroy them before September, but is unlikely to succeed. Meanwhile, a separate peace process with ELN, the country's second largest armed group, has stalled. That group is refusing to lay down their weapons.
Álvaro Ferrero Tascón, let me begin with you by asking you, how big a deal is this laying down of individual weapons? Was it the right thing to do to have a ceremony to mark the occasion?
It is absolutely historic, necessary after 50 years of a terrible war with more than 5 million displaced people, hundreds of thousands people dead. It was morally, politically, economically necessary. The Colombian people during 50 years had consensus on the need to end the war and that it would end by political means. The first phase would be military, but at the end it will be a political ending of the war, and that's what's happened exactly. This is the last war of the Western Hemisphere. The Berlin Wall fell 25 years ago, and in Colombia we're still struggling with the anti-communist message. So it is absolutely necessary for this country to end its internal conflict so it can modernize and get to work on many reforms that are very necessary. The internal conflict has been a tool for legitimizing some of the worst political practices. So only with the end of the war can the political system move on to a much more modern and transparent way of being. It's traumatic. This is a traumatized society. We have a culture of violence. War is much more legitimate in the eyes of many Colombians than peace. So we're in a transition that it's not easy, but history will tell that this was a good deal, and it would have been very unfortunate to pass this historic opportunity in which all the situations permitted
Alvaro,
the peace deal.
We saw in that report how there's great skepticism as to whether or not the rest of those weapons in those arms caches will be taken by the UN by September. Do you share that skepticism?
No, I do not. The FARC has given the directions where to find 1947 places full of weapons. So the United Nations only has to get there and take them out. If the FARC don't tell the truth, they won't be able to get the judicial license not to go to jail. So either they tell the truth, either they give up all the arms, or they will have to pay for that judicially. So it's not only an act of faith, but the Accords place very serious consequences if the weapons are not given
if they don't,
to the hands of
if they don't respect their word. Paloma Valencia, your thoughts on where we've gotten to so far, and well, you just heard Alvaro saying that there's no going back now. We're on the road to something new.
Well, I would like to point out that the people rejected this deal because although we all want peace for Colombia, we think the means in which this deal was done are a big mistake for the future of Colombia, because this is a way in which violence will reborn once and again. So we're very worried about that, because Colombia's problems are not FARC, it's the drug dealing business, the illegal business of mining, the extortion business. So at the point when you have all these businesses growing, Colombia is at the point that it's going to have much more violence. And we are given a wrong message for the society, because these people of FARC who committed crimes against humanity, who kidnapped a lot of people of Colombia, who recruited more than 11,000 children, who abuse and assault more than 7,000 women. So they're going out of jail. They're not going to pay not even 1 day of jail. They're going to have political representation without even needing votes. They're going to have special concessions, money for the politics, money for the parties, and they're giving a wrong message for the Colombian people. Because
Senator Valencia, on that point, the leader of your party, the former president, he says, he's quoted as saying he's no longer for scrapping the peace deal, simply for revising it. Do you agree with him?
That's the same position we have been arguing from the beginning. We think there should be a political negotiation to end the violence of FARC, but you shouldn't be given prizes to this kind of violent people, because it's important for the Colombian people to know that if you commit a crime against humanity, you will pay for it. And it's important for everybody here to know that violence is never a way into politics. If you open that door, that you can just make a lot of violence, kidnap a lot of people, kill a lot of people, and then go into office without even needing votes, you're giving a wrong message for the ELN, for all these other armed organizations who are willing to make a lot of violence to deserve the same benefits that FARC are taking now.
All right, Inti Landauer, you've been with us for several times here on this show throughout this process. How does it look now when you take stock on the day when there's this ceremony marking the handing in of individual weapons to UN monitors?
Well, again, we have another ceremony. We see the country going forward with that peace agreement, and things look better now than they were in the past. But it's still not. Peace is still not a complete reality. I think the two interventions we heard were interesting because it's really both sides. It's on one side a very good news. It's a guerrilla movement that's been killing people, wreaking a lot of violence around Colombia. But on the other hand, their sincerity is questioned from the beginning. And you have, if you've seen all the social networks in social media today in Colombia, the big debate was, well, we were talking about 14,000 weapons and now they're giving the last, and we're talking about 7,000. What happened to the other 7,000? And people are still questioning the sincerity of the FARC. And on the other hand, I think the peace deal was oversold to Colombians, because violence won't end with that peace deal. Violence with the FARC will probably end. Still, some guerrilla fighters related to the FARC will probably keep on fighting. Then you have other guerrilla groups. You have drug traffickers. There was a bomb exploding a few days ago
10 days ago at a shopping mall in Bogota.
Yes. So violence is certainly not over in Colombia.
Violence is not over. You heard Senator Valencia there express her fears about that dissident rebel movement, the ELN. Is there now a situation with the FARC? It's a question we asked the last time, but the FARC handing in their weapons, that there's a power vacuum, and
that would take
that will mean more violence rather than less.
And be used by rival groups. It's certainly a possibility.
Benjamin Kreutzfeld, your thoughts on this?
Well, certainly it's only the beginning of a long process. I would, although I'm here in Washington, would remind viewers of what the former president of Germany, Gauck, said, who said, as long as the violence has lasted, you must almost double that. Let's have a very long view on process beginning. So the event today, the handing over of a large cache of arms, is symbolically hugely important. I would agree with that. But it's also true what my fellow panelists have said, that there is still a sense of distrust that has characterized the Colombian people for many decades. And that's something that from outside it's easy to see that peace is surely what everybody should want. But there are interests that prefer certain instability. There are many armed groups with and without political affiliation across the country that want territorial control and make money on that. And so peace is not necessarily really in everybody's interests, and that's what we're seeing, and that's worrying.
Benjamin, I was speaking with somebody who reported on the FARC movement quite a bit. He was saying how many of those, I guess you call them now former fighters, are worried that they're sitting ducks because in the 1980s, a lot of guerrillas who handed in weapons were subsequently killed. Are they right to be fearful?
Absolutely. I mean, the killing of union leaders, union members, has not stopped, and that tends to be right-wing paramilitaries. And earlier there was talk of criminality. Violence should not be condoned, but of course the fact that former President Uribe has not been, he's been accused but not been indicted for a number of crimes, shows that many can get away with violence. And so I can understand that FARC fighters are worried. And something also that has been talked about but not mentioned just now is that the arms not yet handed over, not so much is there a worry that the UN won't find them. That is indeed a condition that FARC must help them, but that other armed groups will find them first. And there is quite a lot of time armed groups that are into illegal mining and all sorts of criminal activities that are possibly going to be strengthened and a threat to the former FARC members.
All right, when we come back, we're going to take a look at, obviously, another way to fill that power vacuum. And again, it's to address, well, the issues regarding development and an alternative to the narcotics trade for the people who live in the areas that are worst hit by the violence. Stay with us. You're watching the France 24 debate. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate. We're speaking on the day of what's considered a major step on the road to finalizing the peace agreement that'll end Latin America's longest running conflict between the government of Colombia and the FARC rebellion. The handing in of individual weapons, bigger arms caches, still due to be handed into UN monitors by September. With us to talk about it, Inti Landaro, former Bogota bureau chief for the Wall Street Journal. Joining us from the Colombian capital, Alvaro Ferrero Tascon, columnist and political analyst who writes for El Spectador. Senator Paloma Valencia of the Centro Democrático Party of former President Alvaro Uribe. Welcome back, and welcome back from Washington. Benjamin Kreutzfeldt, who's at the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies, ahead of that ceremony that's been taking place in the town of Mesetas in the central part of Colombia. The FARC saying, well, we are no longer rebels.
We're no longer going to be an armed guerrilla. We're no longer going to be like that. We're going to integrate ourselves into society and take part in politics.
Inti Landaro, there are provisions, right? They're going to automatically give them, I think it's 5 seats in the lower chamber and 5 seats in the Senate before another round of elections. How's that going to go?
Well, it looks beautiful. I mean, that guerrilla fighter saying that he wants to go stop fighting and go into politics, but it's not that easy in Colombia. The FARC has lost a lot of, any goodwill and credibility in politics in Colombia after years of fighting, of kidnapping people, like everything Paloma was saying earlier. It's true, and the Colombian people is certainly not standing behind the FARC. There's very few people would vote for them, based on their history, and that's one of the main issue. That's why so many people hated that peace agreement.
And speaking of votes, there's elections next year.
Precisely, and a lot of people, including Alvaro Uribe on both sides, are trying to use that peace agreement to build on momentum for the elections next year, definitely.
Alvaro Ferrero Tascon, what is the mood right now where you are in Bogota in that respect?
Well, the truth is, there's not much of a celebration. The Colombian people are a little confused on the peace issue. The political message saying that we're giving too much to the FARC has gained space. And this is a country who's lived under political violence during 50 years. And the truth is, war was very popular. That gave a lot of support to political parties. People wanted to defeat the FARC. So now trying to allow a political settlement is not satisfactory to many. History will tell, but at the present moment, political circumstances don't allow a big celebration. People are worried. People don't believe in FARC, although reality shows that they have given up their weapons, and they have shown political interest in going into politics. But many people believe they have no moral authority to go into politics.
Alvaro, let me read you one reaction. Let me read you one reaction on the hashtag F24 debate. Likewise, the agreement is asking the FARC to trust the government, which hasn't exactly earned it lately. What's your reaction to what that viewer has to say, Alvaro Ferrero Tascon?
Well, the truth is the accords do not simply rely on the FARC wanting to keep their promises. They have to. If they do not, they'll go to jail. They have given up their weapons now. And they have to come into political life, which is not easy. They're very unpopular, so they won't have an easy road, especially during the first years. So there's no way that the FARC can get to power in the immediate future. The deal is good enough because the Colombian government is only giving them 5 seats in the Senate and 5 seats in the House, which is very little. The Senate is made up of 104 senators, so having only 5 does not give them any power. This is more an issue of hatred, of contempt for the FARC, but things will change once Colombians see that they have changed arms for votes and that democracy is able to manage things better. During many years, people have thought that if without the war, the communists will take power. That's not going to take place in Colombia. That's just a fear. But we need time. Colombian people need time to start believing. Once the FARC start coming into political life, things will look different. But until now, we're in the very small first phases of the transition, and there's more fear than hope.
And that part of that fear, and I'll put it to you, Paloma Valencia, is again has to do with sort of the vacuum that this deal might lead to. You mentioned in part one, there could be other armed groups that fill that vacuum. What do you do for a place like Mesetas? How do you bring development to the hinder regions of Colombia, places where there hasn't been proper land reform under any government, the kind of land issues that matter a lot and that could bring more prosperity to the people who live there? All right, we seem to have, I'm going to interrupt you, Paloma Valencia, because we seem to have lost the sound. Let's try it once more. Can you hear us? Can we hear you, rather? No, unfortunately. All right, we'll cross back to you as soon as that's fixed. Let me put it to you, Benjamin Kreutzfeld. We have the sound back. All right, excuse us. Paloma Valencia.
No, I was telling you that that's a very difficult question, because that's the question that Colombia has been asking itself for many years. We don't have presence of the state over all the countryside, not because we didn't want to, because we don't have the money, we don't have the institutions to do so. And the fact is that the government negotiated with FARC as peace depended on this agreement, and they gave as peace depended on it. But the fact is that Colombians are now seeing that we're given a lot, like political representation without votes, no jail for crimes against humanity, and all these advantages that FARC receive. In exchange, nothing is going to change, because FARC is going to go into politics, but the violence will be steady in Colombia. And I wanted to point out something that I was really worried about, because the previous speaker, I don't know, probably was Benjamin, he said Albert Uribe was linked to paramilitary armed groups. And I think that's a huge lie. And there is no evidence, and President Uribe is the most important politician in Colombia. He dropped the homicide rate in Colombia from 2002 to 2011 in 45%. So Colombians really care about Álvaro Uribe, and I wanted to point out that the fear of guerrillas of being killed, of course, is something that they should fear because Colombia has been in a lot of violence, but they killed a lot of people. They killed political people. They exterminated almost all the leaders of the traditional parties in many areas of Colombia. They kidnapped to put pressure in the state. All these politicians and policemen and army.
Right, but it's
military.
not just FARC guerrillas that are being killed. It's also trade unionists, for instance.
Precisely.
Yeah, but during President Uribe period, the homicide against unionists was diminished almost to 4 people in a year, which was in 192 when he began. So the figures shows that President Uribe was a very effective politician in terms of achieving peace for Colombians. So people do not understand why, if we're doing so well, the President Santos decide to give everything to FARC when they don't deserve it. And they tell the people that it was the price of peace. And of course, if you are talking about peace, you will pay anything. But the fact that violence is now just starting again in many areas are given the sign that this agreement wasn't what it was promised to be.
Benjamin Kreutzfeld, your thoughts on what you do to get to the root causes of what created a half century of civil war in Colombia, and which government is better placed right now to deal with those root causes?
That's a very good question. I mean, partly one word that hasn't been mentioned, of course, is there's been a lot of talk of violence, but also corruption. And that's why I lived in Colombia for many years and actually just got back yesterday from a trip there. And what I find among the population is not that people are only skeptical of FARC and they're laying down the arms. They're skeptical of the government and skeptical of political parties in general. And there's a lot of apathy and indifference, which, as we know from Elie Wiesel's famous comment, is worse than love or hatred, is indifference. It's simply not caring or being concerned that it simply is not going to come through. And one of the root causes you ask about is the the extreme inequality of distribution of land in the country. Colombia is one of the leads the charts in that, and that is not happening currently. But there have been some very remarkable efforts. I should also give credit where it deserves, which is that Uribe did indeed bring down violence. But it's odd, and the New York Times had a very good editorial in December that highlighted, if he did so well then, why can he not support the continuation of this process? It cannot be only violence. There must be now a new way forward, and one of the ways that I see as hopeful is to get to the root causes is, for instance, redistribution of some land in certain areas that the Minister of Environment recently presented at the Inter-American Dialogue here in Washington. And so there are a number of initiatives within the country and the strong support from certain institutes, think tanks, universities in the United States that see that as a way forward. It has to be a multi-pronged approach, and there are good initiatives. But I've also spoken to diplomats from other countries, for instance, China, a big investor in Latin America, who simply are worried about the outcome of the elections next year, and that is a key that needs to, if there is to be any hope in the peace process, there has to be investment from outside for the infrastructure, for connectivity, for education, for hospitals, for all sorts of things that are severely lacking in most parts of Colombia, and that's where only a confidence in a continued process can guarantee the influx of investment and of foreign presence. Foreigners still don't trust it and don't want to go there and go elsewhere. So that's a real worry that the open electoral process, this huge contradiction and conflict still sown, mainly one perceives from outside by the Centro Democrático, is something that simply causes fear. And I know many foreign investors would stay clear of Colombia for some time to come to see what happens.
All right, this whole issue that we mentioned it earlier, this issue of land reform, land redistribution, it's key to stop those indigenous people from falling prey to the drug trade, for instance, or to remaining forever in poverty,
or to join the guerrilla,
or to join the guerrilla movement. Inti Laure, one viewer on the hashtag F24 debate talking about the drug trade pointing the finger at the United States, saying it isn't the end of the trade as long as there's a market of consumers in the US, Canada, and Europe, and that there's poverty in Latin America.
It's true. Colombia remains one of the, well, Colombia, Peru, and Bolivia remain the only significant producers of cocaine, and the demand is not falling anywhere. So, since there is no change in northern countries, you will keep having violence in countries like Colombia.
Which brings us to another important topic, the role of the United States. Since the Clinton administration, Washington has poured huge amounts of money, mostly with the Drug Enforcement Agency, into Colombia. What's going on now? The Trump administration, we don't quite know what their policy is yet.
We didn't hear him, Donald Trump, talking about Colombia. As far as I can tell, I think he said something. Maybe Benjamin knows better. I think he was. He spoke about supporting the Santos, right?
He spoke, I mean, it was very odd and observed by, for example, the USIP, Ginny Bouvier, who thought it was very odd that he received Pastrana and Uribe before he received the official representative of the country a few weeks later, Santos. At least that was then an official visit. So there was a sort of worry that Trump might be swayed to undermine the peace process from outside. But in the end, he was... In fact, during the press conference with Santos, Trump was very emphatic and really only spoke of the drug trade. He didn't really speak of the peace process very much or of other trade. He just spoke, we've got to, we'll build the wall, and was his, he picked that one up again. And also spoke of the need to counter drug violence. But again, there must be other ways forward. And obviously in Colombia nowadays there is some talk of legalization, which would cut huge amounts of the funds and the illegality from the drug trade. Maybe that is the only way. That is, but again, not something that Trump is likely to endorse at all.
Well, Alvaro Ferreira-Tascon, let me ask you, what role would you like to see the United States play to help Colombia?
Well, the United States has held a very important position. The Obama government was very helpful. The Clinton government was very helpful with Plan Colombia. So the United States is part of a beneficiary and of the peace agreement. The Plan Colombia always held that first came the military pressure and then came the political arrangements. So what's happened is what we all thought would happen at the end, only that some politicians are getting out of the agreement, of the consent, for populist reasons. But the United States has reasons to be very comfortable with the agreement. In good part, the United States helped finance the fight against the FARC, but also the political agreement. So for the Trump government, it would have no logic to do not support the results, the positive results of a 15-year effort.
Paloma Valencia,
So
Paloma Valencia, your thoughts?
Well, what I think is the government of the U.S., as many other governments, should be very skeptic about this agreement, because the fact is Colombia was dealing with drug trafficking in a very successful way. We reduced the cultivations to 79,000 hectares, and now we're again in almost 200,000 hectares, which means we are the first producer of cocaine of the world once again. That is a very worrying signal for the world and for the Colombian people, because, as I was pointing out, Colombian violence is financed with this money. So the more illegal crops are in the country, the more violence we're expecting to have. In the other account, I will say it's also very, very delicate, the situation of eradication nowadays, because FARC has pulled the idea that they will defend the peasants against the government on the eradication programs. So they're arguing that the government shouldn't eradicate, that they should do it voluntarily, but voluntarily nobody wants to do it because it's a very profitable business. And on the other hand, I'll say that it's very, very nice to think that a land reform will change the constitution of the social problems that has Colombia. But the fact is that all the agricultural sector in Colombia is only the 14% of the GDP. And we have a poverty that exceeds 52% of the population. So in numbers, you cannot solve the poverty of a country with 14% of the GDP. So the problem is much larger and much difficult to solve.
Inti Landaro, what do you do? What's the alternative for these peasants, for farmers?
An alternative as profitable as drug cultivation is difficult to find. But I think, contrary to Paloma, I think the land reform could do a big difference. Could make a big difference in other countries in Latin America. The land reform, precisely, even if peasants who own the land are almost as poor as those who don't, bring some social peace in the countryside that has. In countries like Peru, where I've been living a few years too, you had arguably the Shining Path lost a lot of power in the countryside because peasants there didn't support the violence because they wanted to do business more than going to joining the guerrillas. And I think it would be significant, even if it would be significant for the peasants, even if it wouldn't be that significant for the whole economy of Colombia, as Paloma is saying.
Benjamin Kreutzfeld, has plans been laid out? Are people thinking about this? Are there plans being drawn up to change the way land is run in Colombia?
Well, specifically, as the Environment Minister of Colombia said a few weeks ago here a few days ago only in DC at the Inter-American Dialogue, there have been specific plans and that have been explored and that have actually had a lot of advice also from think tanks and from experience in Central America and from plans drawn up also in Europe that really could work very well, that enable or ensure a transition from drug growing only from drug crops to other crops. The difficulty again is connectivity and therefore investment. So if roads, if markets become more accessible, foreign markets and national markets, then that is also something that goes hand in hand with a land reform and the ability for peasants to find a different trade. But you mentioned earlier that the consumer market in the United States especially and in Europe is huge. So that is going to be an ongoing problem.
All right, I want to thank you, Benjamin Kreutzfeld, for joining us from Washington, as well Paloma Valencia and Alvaro Ferrero Tascon in Bogota, Inti Landaro. Stay with us. Media Watch is next. I got to say, we say hello to James Creedon.
Hi, Francois.
We were inspired for the title of our show from the hashtag that we saw today. Adios a las armas. Is that right? And that was the hashtag that we saw that was going viral in Colombia.
That's right. And even the hashtag has been a source of comment and debate in itself. Hashtags are normally meant to just gather together the comments, but it became part of the comments.
So there were rival hashtags? Or?
Well, it was seen as not very, perhaps an overly optimistic hashtag. I'll get to that in just one moment. But first, some of the kind of more general official acknowledgements of what's been happening. This is a tweet from the UK UN in New York, this diplomatic Twitter account. This is no longer words on paper. This is historic action. The FARC have laid down their arms. So a lot of congratulatory tweets like that going around social media. FARC themselves on their one of their Twitter accounts saying that it is goodbye to arms and goodbye to war and welcome peace, viva la vida.
Long live life.
Long live life, vive la vie. Peace in Colombia is finally in sight. FARC rebels have completed their disarmament. Now, so you can see some of the tweets are a little bit more cautious, saying peace is in sight. Others going right ahead and congratulating Colombia for what they consider to be a chapter that is now over. It's over. The FARC guerrillas hand in all of their weapons after 52 years. And of course, then when you see the legacy of that period of conflict and violence, perhaps you understand the reason for why congratulations might be in order. 260,000 dead in that conflict, 60,000 still missing, and 52 years of civil war. Now, to get to that controversial hashtag, you have one person here, adios a las FARC, goodbye to FARC, or fin de las FARC, end of the FARC. Others saying, well, hold on a minute, they're actually going to continue as a political party. So FARC isn't over. It's a period of FARC's history that is over. So this particular comment here saying that it actually is making this person laugh to talk about adios FARC. It's certainly perhaps not 100% accurate. There were some comments too, Francois, on social media about the nature of various different terror organizations. For example, the PKK, the Kurdish group, the IRA, FARC, and how these organizations have political ends and can be negotiated with, as we saw today, unlike some of the terror formations that we're seeing contemporarily or at the moment, such as the Islamic State organization, which are perhaps less open to negotiation, political negotiation.
All right, many thanks for that, James Creed. More reactions will be coming in. I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.